On to the second Elite Eight game on Saturday, second of two. Number 4 seed Alabama, about a 3.5 point favorite, depending on the book, against 6 seeded Clemson, total of 155. I have Clemson Final Four futures, 28-1 tickets. So interesting game for me to handicap. My raw numbers actually make this game, I think it's a little bit inflated. I have it Alabama -1, right around Alabama -1. Haslametrics, our partner, closer to Alabama -1.5, but still, sizable edge, 1.5, 2-point edge, which is what you look for in the betting market when it comes to college basketball spreads. And the first time either of these teams will head to the Final Four. Rematch of what we saw in non-conference play when Clemson won by 8 in Tuscaloosa. Keep in mind, Jack Clark, who is Clemson's Swiss Army knife, wasn't fully healthy in that game. I think only played 12 minutes. It really wasn't fully healthy until Clemson shocked UNC after the Tar Heels beat Duke in early February. But some notes for me here, and then I'll swing it to you, Mike. So Clemson's opponents, like we said, Caleb Love was terrible from 3. Arizona was terrible from 3. And so have pretty much all of Clemson's opponents. Granted, New Mexico isn't very efficient from deep in general. Their first round matchup, as you hit on, their opponents have shot 18.7% from behind the arc. Clemson shooting 33.3% from deep. Now, you may say, okay, regression is going to come, negative regression is going to come, water is going to meet its level. But I have some historical examples that kind of show that sometimes positive variance just happens, especially when a team is starting to peak. You go back to 2022, UNC, before they lost to Kansas in the title game, so their first 5 NCAA tournament opponents, shot 29.3% from 3. UNC shot 36% from deep. In UCLA's Final Four run, the year before that, opponents shot 26.9% from 3. And they shot 31.1% from 3. And with Alabama this year, their opponents have shot 28.2% from deep, while the Tide are shooting 40% from 3. And keep in mind, that's including a terrible or 25%-ish clip against Grand Canyon in the second round. And the Lopes were also off from 3 and off on the free throw line, for that matter, in that second round matchup where Alabama went outright and covered. So I have my notes on the individual matchup, but just, Mike, for anybody saying, okay, Clemson's going to get trucked in this game because negative variance is coming for them, sometimes positive variance can carry over game by game. Like, you go back to conference play for Clemson, they shot 29% from 3, and their opponent shot 37%-ish from 3 from early January to late February, when they were still kind of getting adjusted when Clark wasn't healthy. So I think this team is really starting to peak at the right time, is my point.
I do too. I think Clemson's absolutely a live shot in this game. These are two teams that, they kind of all season long, the metrics have liked them more than the human eye test has. You look at it and you're like, why is Clemson, 23rd on some of these advanced metrics lists? Like, why is Alabama still in the top 10 when they're only 16-8 or whatever their record was at various times? And a lot of times we wind up seeing those metrics looking pretty smart once March rolls around. These are two teams that fit that mold for sure. I like Clemson because I think that they've been more consistent as the season's played out, and I think that your shooting variance numbers are they definitely come into play here. I think that Alabama is due for more of a regression in a game like this than Clemson is. I just think that Bama, when you look at, like, I hate to say it, like, they're due for a clunker, and I also, like, this is not based on any sort of statistic or whatever. When you watch them last night, this is just one of those, like, March things. You kind of got the sense that they felt like they punched their ticket to the Final Four when they beat North Carolina. And that's always a little bit of a, for me, when I see teams like this that have been up and down throughout a season and they get that big win. Because we know that Bama at their best can play with anybody. That's never been their thing. All season long, we've said, if Bama can just play okay defensively and they play their A game on offense, they were like that Kentucky team in the same conference where they can play with anybody, but they can also lose to anybody. And last night we saw them get up, beat the number 1 seed in what was a super emotional game, gigantic output. And when I saw the way that they were celebrating, I was kind of like, they sort of look like they feel like their mission's accomplished. And I'm sure that they know, they went into that game last night knowing that Clemson had already won. Arizona was out, the 2 seed was out. And so, maybe they're kids. Maybe there's a little bit in their brain there where they're thinking, all right, like, we're excited for the Final Four. Let's take our shot at whoever's coming into the semifinal. And Clemson winds up and takes it to them. One of the crazy trends that I love in March is every Final Four since 2012 that we've seen has had at least one team seeded 5th or worse. And I think all of them but one have had a team seeded 7th or worse. The only other team that can continue that trend is NC State over there on the other side of the bracket. So Clemson, recent history says we're going to get one of those teams that's just like, where did they come from? Nobody ever saw this coming. And I kind of feel like Clemson has become this team, and as that tournament goes on, I think that PJ Hall built for this type of moment. I think he'll be rock solid inside. He's, if the officials let him get away with all those elbows and all that stuff, then he's going to get in the minds of the Alabama team and kind of throw them off their game a little bit. Chase Hunter, I think he's been their best player this season. He definitely has that March kind of moment feel to him. I think he can step up to the challenge. I think he'll also embrace the style that Alabama wants to play in. I really like Clemson in this game. I may wind up regretting it. I feel like it's a game that Alabama's either going to win by 20 or Clemson's going to win by like 3 or 4.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And you mentioned, so maybe Hunter, like we saw in the first half, I think Clemson's first or one of their first 2 buckets, he drove the ball in transition. So it's not like Clemson won't selectively run like UConn. I'm not saying Clemson is comparable to UConn by any stretch, but generally speaking, they're a slower paced team. And that definitely fits what Clemson wants to do, trying to take away the 3, at least in transition for Alabama, and slow this thing into a rock fight. And Brad Brownell is definitely going to enforce that and try to dictate that pace here. And then you look at PJ Hall against Alabama's front court, especially, even if Pringle plays with that shin, heel, foot injury, whatever it may be, I don't think he's 100%. That's Alabama's best post defender to me. And if you look at the efficiency numbers per synergy, Alabama allowing 0.88 points per possession on opponents' post-up touches, that ranks in the 43rd percentile. And when you look at more of a surface level, traditional numbers, 7.4 post-up points per game allowed. That's 15th highest nationally. So PJ Hall, Ian Shefflin, Gerard and Hall and Shefflin and Hunter, everybody in the mid-range, can take advantage of Alabama in that sense, because Alabama sometimes plays drop coverage. They've switched it up. They've hard hedged at times this season. They've schematically adjusted in second halves, but they do play their fair share of drop. We'll see how Nate Oates decides to play this thing. And then the matchup zone, you mentioned Brownell kind of going with a softer approach, like a softer shell zone defense at times that Clemson did over the first couple games, especially against New Mexico, because they're not an efficient 3-point shooting team. I'm looking at you, Jalen House. That kind of negates Alabama's athleticism, especially if you get those forced threes that we saw Caleb Love take and Pele Larson take at times. Even though Arizona could take threes, see, this is the difference between Arizona and Alabama. Arizona ranks like bottom 60 in 3-point attempt rate. Alabama is obviously a 3-point heavy shooting team, but they're much different in transition, like we saw against UNC last night, than if you get them into the half court and it's late shot clock and they feel like they have to force up a 3. They're much more reliant on the 3, so maybe there's a little bit of regression coming for Clemson's 3-point defense to an extent. But Clemson also, when I mention forcing Alabama into the half court, they're also pretty elite when it comes to their transition defense, and Jack Clark is a big reason why. So I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to play my Clemson Final Four futures here, if I'm going to hedge you a little bit, but I do feel really good matchup-wise. If Pringle's injury does loom large, which I think it could, whether he starts or comes off the bench, and then also Wrightsell, who knows if he's going to play with that potential concussion.
Yeah, I think that's, like you said, it's one of those games, kind of like last night's game against Arizona, where if Alabama's going to come out and they're going to just shoot the lights out, you throw your hands up if you're Clemson and you say, well, yeah, this was our best chance to win this game. This was statistically, this was the way that we had to play this. And if last night, Caleb Love's a guy who's capable of going off for 40 on a given night. He's capable of shooting Arizona out of a game on a given night. And if it had been, the former, where he just was hitting everything, Arizona was moving on and they're playing in the Elite Eight. It wasn't. And so Clemson's here. It's kind of the same thing. If Mark Sears is going to go nuts from the outside, if some of these other guys, Estrada's going to go nuts from the outside, there's only so much you can do. I look at the first matchup, and I do think, how much we can take away from that, you can debate that. But PJ Hall, to your point, was really, really good in that game, really effective at getting it inside. I think he scored 21 points. The one guy that I will circle who I feel like has kind of been poised for, we haven't heard from him that much in this tournament, is Joe Girard for Clemson. He's a 25-point game waiting to happen if you give him a ton of outside shots. He had 7 threes, took 7 threes in the first game against Bama and made 4 of them. Bama's going to let him get shots, and he's a big game waiting to happen. It's going to happen at some point if Clemson makes this run to the Final Four. And I kind of circled this one and think Bama will let him get his looks, I think. And he's a guy who loves, very streaky shooter. When he hits a couple, he's going to get it going. He's going to start talking some, bleep. He's going to start, he's going to start feeling it a little bit. And I can see him getting it going in this game, especially if Chase Hunter maybe is a little bit off and needs somebody to defer to. Like I said, I keep, it goes back to if Bama is just making a crazy amount of threes, which is certainly possible. There's only so much you can do with the personnel that you have at Clemson. But if they're not, which I think is the more likely output here, I really like Clemson to do what they need to do in half-court situations and just kind of be rock solid on the other end of the floor to win this game. I think that they're very live shot.
Yeah, defensively too. Clemson ranks top 60 in defensive rebounding percentage. Now, I will say, going back to that first meeting, Alabama 15 offensive rebounds and 16 last night. So that's an area where I didn't think Alabama was going to be able to exploit UNC in terms of generating that many second chance opportunities. So maybe that negates Clemson's upper echelon defensive rebounding percentage to an extent. Hall and Shefflin, though, you would expect Clemson to play towards the defensive glass, get back in transition. They're not really an offensive rebounding team in general in terms of creating second chance opportunities themselves. So I wouldn't really expect that to change, especially with how much Brownell is going to enforce. We need to keep Alabama in the half court, right?
Right. I mean, I think that both teams are going to do what they've done consistently in this tournament, what they've done all season long. It's just going to be a matter of which team can do what they do well the best on this particular night. So, Brad Brownell, he hasn't been here before. This is the first time Clemson's been to an Elite Eight since 1980. But my God, the guy's been coaching at this program for what feels like 35 years, which is like 70 years in this day and age. So, I don't think the moment's going to be too big for him. Last night, it certainly was not too big for him in the Sweet 16. Nate Oates, we'll see. I think that especially young guys, when they start to get this reputation of, they can't win when it's the biggest, which is a little bit kind of attached to him. I don't know if he panics a little bit or if he's not ready for the big time moment, but it's going to be a fascinating matchup. I think either side, you've got the weird dichotomy of a fan base that it just kind of casually pays attention to basketball. I think Bama's gotten into it a little bit more in recent years. They've had some really, really good home crowds. Clemson still is just kind of this is a fun little thing to do before we get ready for spring practice. But these two programs, they've plugged away. They've gotten to this point. They've put a lot into their basketball programs in recent years, and it's cool to see them have this moment in March. It's nice that Alabama and Clemson get to finally have something go their way for a change in college athletics, right?
Exactly. My biggest question for you, though, Mike, are you going to be ordering the chef hat like we've seen Clemson student section rock over the last 3 games for free Ian Shefflin? No,
but I love it. I do love it. I might Ian Shefflin, who looks like a kind of a larger Jack White. He's become one of the stars of their March run, but he's a fun guy to watch and an easy guy to root for. And I do love the chef hats.